resisting law enforcement. You need to comply now!
The first blow came at 01:03 a.m. Detective Frank. Wilson's size 11 boot met Brian Davis's front door with the force of a battering ram. Wood exploded inward in jagged shards that rained across the hardwood like broken teeth. Tactical lights stabbed through the darkness, 4 white beams slicing the quiet suburban house into pieces. Brian stepped out of his bedroom hallway barefoot, wearing nothing but gray boxer shorts and an old army t-shirt, palms already open and high. "Hands where I can see them!" Wilson roared, voice thick with adrenaline and something darker. Brian's hands were already up. They had been up the moment he heard the first kick. But Wilson saw only a 6'3" black man in the dark and decided that wasn't enough. "Get your black ass on the ground before I put it there myself." The words left Wilson's mouth like bullets. Brian lowered himself slowly, knees first, then chest, then cheek against the cool floor his daughter had helped him refinish last summer. He did not resist. He did not speak. His breathing stayed measured, the way they had drilled into him at Fort Benning years ago. Control what you can control. Wilson dropped a knee between Brian's shoulder blades, grinding down until cartilage creaked. Cold steel cuffs snapped around wrists that still carried faint scars from Kandahar. Another officer, Ramirez, name tape flashing under the lights, yanked. Brian's arms so high his shoulders screamed. "Stop resisting!" Ramirez yelled, though Brian hadn't moved an inch. The body camera on Wilson's chest bounced with every shove, capturing the splintered door, the overturned coffee table, the family photos crashing from the wall. One frame shattered. Glass glittered across a picture of Brian in dress blues holding his then-infant daughter at her christening. From the stairs, a small voice pierced the chaos. "Daddy?" 8-year-old Aliyah stood frozen on the landing in her unicorn pajamas, eyes wide, phone clutched in both tiny hands. Her mother, Tamika, appeared behind her a second later, arms out like a shield. "Get back upstairs!" Wilson barked without looking. Tamika's voice cracked like ice. "You have the wrong house. This is 1842, not 1848. Check your damn warrant." Wilson finally glanced at the paperwork crumpled in his fist. The address glowed under his flashlight. 1848. Maple Ridge Lane. He looked at the mailbox visible. Through the wreckage of the door, 1842, 6 houses down. Same street. Same floor plan. Wrong black man. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Wilson's knee was still buried in Brian's back. Brian's cheek was still pressed to the floor. Aliyah was crying now, silent, hiccuping sobs that shook her whole body. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flooded the cul-de-sac. Not one cruiser. Not 2. 12. Then 20. Neighbors poured from their houses in robes and slippers, phones raised. Someone started live streaming. Someone else started screaming that the police had just raided an Army veteran. A school security officer, a deacon at St. Mark's. By 01:17 a.m., the officers who had kicked in the door found themselves in a tightening circle of their own making. Brian Davis rose slowly to his knees, wrists bleeding from the cuffs, and looked Frank Wilson dead in the eye. For the first time all night, Brian spoke. "You done?" he asked, voice low, steady, lethal in its calm. Wilson had no answer. The cameras did, and the entire country was about to watch. Brian Davis had never trusted easy mornings. He woke at 5:15 every day, long before the sun bled across Henderson, Georgia. First came prayer on the worn rug beside his bed, then push-ups until his shoulders burned, then coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By 6, he was kissing Aliyah's forehead while she pretended to still be asleep, then driving Tamika to the hospital where she worked labor and delivery. At 7 sharp, he clocked in at Henderson High as a school resource officer, the one the kids called Mr. D because he refused to carry a gun on campus. He was good at his job because he remembered being 16 once, remembered how the world looked at black boys and saw only threat. He refused to be another pair of eyes that did that. The students loved him for it. The faculty respected him. The football team had voted him honorary captain 2 years running. But Henderson was still Georgia. There were neighborhoods where he was welcomed with lemonade and others, where porch lights flicked off when his pickup rolled past. There were parents who shook his hand at PTA meetings and then called the principal the next day to ask why a black man was patrolling their children. There were teachers who smiled to his face and then, whispered that he only got hired because of quotas. Brian absorbed it the way he had learned to absorb. Everything, silently, steadily, with a smile that never reached his eyes. At home, he was simply daddy. He coached Aaliyah's soccer team, taught her how to change a tire, let her paint his nails purple when Tamika was on night shift. On Sundays, he wore the same suit his father had worn to his wedding, passed down like a relay baton of dignity. He had come home from Afghanistan, missing part of his hearing in the left ear and carrying ghosts he still couldn't name. The VA gave him pills he never took and a disability rating he never mentioned. Instead, he built a life measured in small, deliberate acts of peace, planting tomatoes in the backyard, reading bedtime stories in silly voices, teaching Aaliyah that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important. He never told her that some nights he still woke up, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. He never told her that every time he put on his uniform, he felt the weight of every black man who had worn one before him and still ended up dead. He just lived until the night the door came off its hinges. The video hit 2 million views before sunrise. By 6 a.m., local news trucks camped on Brian's lawn. By 7, the Henderson PD, public information officer, released a statement claiming officers responded to a domestic violence call involving a firearm at the wrong address due to a clerical error. No mention of the fact that no such call existed. No mention of the fact that Brian had no criminal record, not even a traffic ticket in 12 years. At 8:03, Frank Wilson was placed on paid administrative leave. By 9, his name, address, and family photos were trending on every platform. Brian refused to give interviews. He sat on his porch in the same blood-stained t-shirt from the night before, drinking coffee, watching Aaliyah try to process a world that had just taught her. 8-year-old heart a lesson no. Child should learn. Tamika's hands shook so badly she had to call out of work. At 10, the superintendent called Brian personally and begged him not to come in. For your safety, he said. Brian heard the unspoken part, and hours. By noon, the protests started. First a dozen kids from the high school, then hundreds. They carried signs that read, "Wrong house. Right man and protect Mr. D." Someone started a GoFundMe for the door. It hit $50,000 in 6 hours. At 2 p.m., the mayor held a press conference and called the incident regrettable. At 2:05, someone leaked Wilson's personnel file. 17 complaints in 9 years, all involving black or brown suspects, all marked unfounded. By 4, the Department of Justice announced an investigation. By 6, a pastor from Atlanta was on cable news comparing Brian's living room floor to Emmett Till's coffin. That night, someone spray-painted "Go Back to Africa" on Brian's garage. The next morning, the entire varsity football team showed up with rollers and white paint and covered it before Brian woke up. The day after that, Wilson's wife left him. The day after that, Brian finally spoke to a reporter from the Root who had covered his unit in Afghanistan. The interview lasted 90 minutes and broke the internet. He never raised his voice. He never cursed. He just told the truth, plain and devastating. The city council scheduled an emergency meeting. Half the members didn't show. The other half voted to give Brian a key to the city and a public apology. Brian sent a single text to the mayor. Keep it. Death threats started arriving. Emails, voicemails, handwritten. Letters slipped under the new front door the community had installed. The FBI opened a second investigation, this time into the threats. Aaliyah stopped sleeping. Every creak in the house made her scream. Tamika started carrying a gun she didn't know how to use. Brian sat on the porch every night with a glass of water he never drank, watching the street like it was Fallujah all over again. Then came the lawsuit. Not just against the department, against Wilson personally, against the city, against every officer who had stood in his living room and watched a man be brutalized for existing while black. Discovery was brutal. Body cam footage. The department swore didn't exist. Suddenly body cam footage suddenly materialized. Dispatch logs vanished. Witnesses flipped. Wilson's defense. He feared for his life. From a man in boxer shorts with his hands up. The trial date was set for March. But Henderson couldn't wait that long to burn. March 17th. 10,000 people filled the square outside the courthouse. Half carried Black Lives Matter signs. Half carried thin blue line flags. Someone had parked two flatbeds facing each other like gladiatorial. Arenas, one blasting gospel, one blasting Leonard Skynyrd. Inside, Brian wore the same suit his father had worn to court in 1968, when he fought to keep his voting rights. Wilson wore the expression of a man who had finally realized the story, had slipped from his grip. The prosecution played the body cam footage in open court. The room went so quiet you could hear hearts breaking. Aaliyah's recorded scream, "Daddy!" echoed off the oak panels. Several jurors cried openly. Wilson took the stand and crumbled within 6 minutes. He admitted he never checked the address twice, admitted he used the slur, admitted he kept his knee on Brian's back 38 seconds after realizing the mistake. Then came the moment everyone would replay for years. Brian was called to testify. He walked to the stand carrying nothing but a small wooden cross Aaliyah had made him in Sunday school. He laid it on the rail like a soldier setting down his weapon. The prosecutor asked him how the incident had changed his life. Brian looked directly at Wilson. "You taught my daughter that the people sworn to protect. Her will hurt her daddy for sleeping in his own house," he said. "You taught her that her skin makes her a threat before she even opens her mouth. You taught her that no amount of service, no amount of goodness, no amount of raised hands will ever be enough. So yes, Detective Wilson, you changed my life, but you did not break me, and you will not break her." The courtroom erupted. The judge banged the gavel until it cracked. Then the verdict came back in 11 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Civil rights violation, excessive force, false imprisonment. Wilson was led away in cuffs while the gallery sang, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around." Outside, the crowd roared so loud the courthouse windows shook. Someone set off fireworks. Someone else started crying in the middle of the street and couldn't stop. Brian stepped onto the courthouse steps with Tamika on one side and Aaliyah on the other. Cameras flashed like lightning. He didn't make a speech. He just raised Aaliyah's hand, the one still clutching her little wooden cross, and held it high. The image became the defining photograph of the decade. The settlement was $32 million, the largest in Georgia history. Brian donated half to start the Aaliyah Davis Foundation, scholarships for black kids who wanted to go into teaching, law enforcement or social work, kids who wanted to fix the system instead of burning it down. He never returned to the police department. Instead, he went back to Henderson High, this time as a guidance counselor. The first day, every senior lined up to hug him. Wilson served 22 months in federal prison. When he got out, no department in the country would touch him. Years later, when people ask Aaliyah what her daddy taught her about that night, she answers, "He taught me that sometimes the floor tries to swallow you. But you don't have to stay down. You get up, you plant something anyway, and you make sure the next person who comes after you never has to taste that floor at all." On the day she left for college, Brian handed her the little wooden cross. "Keep it close," he said. "I will," she promised. Then she hugged him so hard his ribs creaked, the same way his had once creaked under a stranger's knee. But this time the pressure was love. And love was the only force on earth strong enough to hold a broken door together long enough for the light to get in.